Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, November the 29th, 2024. Today I want to look at the horoscope of Allan Lichtman. I have looked at his chart before, but I want to look at it again, with reference to the fact that Neptune has been in Pisces for some time, and in previous videos I've been talking about the influence of Neptune in Pisces, and I've been sort of connecting it with religion and perhaps dogma, and how perhaps it has prevented us from seeing the truth of a matter, perhaps because we thought there was only one truth. And Allan Lichtman is famous for predicting that Kamala Harris was going to win the election, and he had his 13 keys, because he's a history professor. He worked out these 13 keys, which would allow one to correctly predict who was going to win an election. And he was sure Kamala Harris was going to win, and obviously she lost. And his reaction has been very interesting. So he refused to really accept blame for getting it wrong, or even to think that there was anything particularly wrong with his model, that it wasn't the model's problem, it was the fact that people were racist or sexist and so on. And so I'm going to be looking at Allan Lichtman's horoscope, and I'm going to also say a bit more about Neptune in Pisces, and I particularly want to consider its opposite sign, its Virgo, because when you're looking at signs and what signs mean, it's often a good idea to look at the sign opposite. And so if you really want to understand Neptune in Pisces, it might also be a good idea to look at Virgo as well. Anyway, before I look at Allan Lichtman and look at Neptune some more, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, November the 29th, 2024. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I would be over the moon if you were to subscribe, because it does make a big difference. I'm now on 8,100 and something subscribers. I had this fantasy that I might make 10,000 by Christmas, but I think I have to revise that fantasy, maybe 9,000 by Christmas. That would be nice. But I think it's pretty unlikely all the same. Anyway, let's look at the positions of the planets today. So, as usual, these planets all set for noon, New York time. And the top right, of course, that is Allan Lichtman, annoyed, I think. And so the moon continues to be in Scorpio. So noon in New York, we've got moon here in 20 degrees Scorpio. So moon is in late Scorpio now. And I think late Scorpio is easier than early Scorpio, all things being equal, because, the via combusta, that part of the sky where things can be a little bit unstable, things can just happen, that's between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio, i.e. late Libra, early Scorpio. But the moon moving into late Scorpio, it may be that it feels that things are just starting to calm down a little. And it still doesn't take away from the fact that moon in Scorpio moon is fallen in Scorpio. And it may be difficult for some of us to really get our emotions out into the open. We have strong emotions for sure, but can we actually reveal these emotions? Well, in terms of the aspects that the moon is experiencing, the moon is making a trine to Saturn. That's going to be more the beginning of the day, but still we've got moon in Scorpio, Saturn in Pisces. So that does suggest perhaps a certain amount of discipline and maybe sort of emotional control. We're able to sort of organize things and have some emotional focus, and perhaps we're not going to sort of allow our emotions to trip us up. And also the moon is making a sextile to Venus. Moon in Scorpio, sextile Venus in Capricorn. That is a pleasant aspect. It's a sextile. It's not not super strong, but it perhaps allows us to sort of use our feelings in a constructive way. Moon sextile Venus, but Venus is in Capricorn, so it's not a crazy aspect, moon sextile Venus, but it does allow us to get on with people, and we can use our emotions to find links. It could be people who we don't know, but moon sextile Venus does suggest that a little bit of effort could be worthwhile. Now, the moon, having made that sextile to Venus, does make an opposition to Uranus, and that moon opposition Uranus, towards the end of the day, I would have said, going to be stronger in the Americas than in Europe, and even stronger from Asia compared to Asia and Australia. And the moon is going to, with that opposition to Uranus, okay, that can bring a little bit of instability, and things can be stirred up, and there might be a certain amount of stubbornness around. People want to do things their way with that moon opposition Uranus. And, really, that is about it. There aren't that many things going on. Though, we should not forget that we're approaching a new moon. So you can see the new moon is approaching. The sun is in Sagittarius. The moon is in Scorpio. And soon enough, tomorrow, the moon enters Sagittarius, and we do have the run up to this new moon. And to be precise about this new moon, I think in my video for the weekend I'll be looking at this new moon in detail. So I don't really want to say too much about it. But this new moon is 6:21 in the morning on Saturday. So that means that if you are in California or Hawaii or Alaska, then very late in the day there will be a new. Very late in the day today. Sorry, that's late in the day on. Let's get this right. That means that you're going to get that. You're going to get that new moon tomorrow. But I think that for most people that is going to be about Sunday, which is December the 1st. But still, new moon is coming up, and I think this is a reminder that it is the very end of the lunar cycle. And so because it's the very end of a lunar cycle, it may not be a time when we can really do much. At least it's absolutely not a good time to be starting things at the moment. Mercury is retrograde, we know that, but right at the end of a lunar cycle, you start something and it's just not going to work out. I mean, a reminder is poor Keir Starmer in the UK, the British Prime Minister. He became Prime Minister just before a new moon, and we're already seeing that. After his election, becoming Prime Minister, everything has gone from bad to worse. And I suppose I should be looking at Keir Starmer in sooner rather than later. But that's a reminder about what happens when you start something just before a new moon. You're basically starting something at the tail end of an old cycle. You're having to deal with old problems. You can't really get anything out that's sort of positive or inspirational. So if you've got big plans, if you want to launch something, then okay, you could say, well, wait until Mercury goes direct in a couple of weeks' time, or at the very least, wait until next week when the new moon is when we've got a new moon. Of course, in the Americas, it's kind of quite natural because I think because you've got Thursday was Thanksgiving. Today's the day after Thanksgiving. I think it's some holiday. I can't remember which holiday. Is it Columbus Day? Or no, it used to be Columbus Day, but it's been changed to something else. So have I got that right? I mean, I'm very bad at American holidays. But then you've got Friday, then you've got the weekend. So America's not going to be the United States is not going to be functioning particularly effectively now, and so Monday is the beginning of a new week. It's the beginning of a new lunar cycle. So that's certainly in the Americas. That would be the obvious time to start something, provided you're not too concerned about Mercury being retrograde. And there is one other aspect to consider, and it's an aspect which is not actually exact today. I think it's exact tomorrow, and that is Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars. And I think we are starting to feel this. And Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars, so they're 135 degrees apart, and so Mercury is going retrograde, Mars is about to go retrograde, and so these two slow-moving planets make this sesquiquadrate, so it could drag on for a little, and it is a somewhat angry aspect, perhaps on a verbal level, and sort of maybe on a sort of a mental level, there are things that are really annoying us, or maybe annoying some people, and we would like to express our annoyance, but are we going to be able to express our annoyance? And Mercury and Mars are actually both on the Saturn Aries midpoint, or at least are aspecting the Saturn Aries midpoint. I think you should be able to see this. So there's Saturn, there's the Aries point. So you can see that Mercury is making a square to the Aries point here. And so Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to the Saturn Aries point. And I suppose a lot of our annoyance is just with the world. Saturn Aries, Aries is the world point, the Aries point. You link it to Saturn, it's everything sort of holding us back, holding us all back. And so with Mercury Mars on the Saturn Aries, aspecting the Saturn Aries midpoint, it's just perhaps a time where we kind of want to rail against the whole world, and everything is slow and it's not going the way we want it to go. And what can we do? Short term, probably nothing. Of course, it may not be us railing against the world, it may be other people, it just may be angry people dealing with a situation which they can't really change. I mean, I suppose they can change if they're in positions of power, but I suppose then it's quite a dangerous situation if you've got powerful people like politicians angry about the way the world is going, the way, for example, particular conflicts are going, the way things are going in their country. So, for example, if you are a senior Democrat who has power, whether you're Joe Biden or Antony Blinken, and you've got Mercury Mars on the Saturn Aries point, you get upset about the fact that Donald Trump won the election, the fact that you're going to hand over to Donald Trump on June the 20th. You're upset about the fact that the war in Ukraine isn't going well. All these kind of things. So perhaps Mercury Mars on a Saturn Aries midpoint, but there's this anger, and it may be to an extent a certain impotent anger, but you do your best, and that perhaps can be somewhat dangerous. Now, that is the position of the planets here from the perspective of New York. Very, very quickly to look at that from the viewpoint of Sydney, Australia. So the moon is just that much earlier in Scorpio. If you are in Australasia, you can see that the moon is actually in 12 Scorpio. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, I suppose the difference is the moon is still going to be in the Via Combusta for most of the day, whereas if you're in the United States, it's out of a Via Combusta. So the only difference is that if you are in Australia or New Zealand or Eastern Asia, then the first part of the day, maybe sort of, in fact, for most of the day, it's going to be for most of the day. I mean, Sydney, the moon is going to go out of a Via Combusta. Sydney about 5 in the afternoon. Going to be early evening if you're in New Zealand. So, still expect things not necessarily to go to plan. That you make your perhaps careful plans, but it doesn't work out. Things happen you weren't expecting, and so just be prepared for that. But by the end of the day, the moon will be in late Scorpio, and the Via Combusta issue will be over. As far as the heliocentric position is concerned, again, there is not a great deal going on. So here it is. The thing I noticed was Mercury is sextile Mars. So Mercury in Taurus, sextile Mars in Cancer. I mean, it's another Mercury-Mars aspect. So I've just been talking about Mercury's sesquiquadrate Mars. And so with Mercury's sextile Mars, it's kind of more of the same, I would have said. It is about verbal anger. I mean, I know it's a sextile, but does it matter? I mean, it's an aspect between Mercury and Mars. Something to get annoyed about. I think that the fact that you've also got a Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars geocentrically just does maybe just emphasize the point that there are things to get annoyed about. And I know it's not exact, but here's the Earth at 7 Gemini. So as Mercury over the next couple of days, as Mercury sort of moves to around sort of 9-10 degrees Taurus, that means that Earth will be on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So we've got that building up over the next couple of days. So we've got a couple of reasons why people might be angry, verbally angry, and people have got things to say, and they're not happy with the way things are going. But I suppose we need to be positive. Mercury sextile Mars. It just may be that if there's something we want to say, we're annoyed, but we might still find the right way of getting our message out into the open. So that's it. And now I want to consider the 12 signs. Yesterday I did my forecast of the 12 signs, and I was brief. And the reason I was brief was mainly because there wasn't a lot going on. And today I would have said astrologically, likewise, there isn't a lot going on. You can't have action all the time. I know we've things do start to get more interesting over the weekend because we've got the new moon to consider. But right now, I'm not convinced there is a lot happening, and that just may be reflected in my forecast. So if I continue to be brief, I don't know, maybe spending only 3 minutes on a sign, don't panic. I'm not, it's not that I've got some deliberate policy to make things shorter. It's just that I might not have so much to say. Anyway, so these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, November the 29th, 2024. Aries. So Aries, the moon continues to move through Scorpio, and it's in Scorpio all day, and it is a time, Aries, when I think that there's just so much that you should be keeping back, that really you don't have to say it all. You can't expect things to happen at the pace you'd like them to. And maybe you should consider where you are putting your resources. I mean, it's probably a good idea to put your resources into your own private world, perhaps your private researches. There are things to think about, things that you need to feel and work out on your own. And don't be afraid of looking below the surface. I mean, Aries is an impulsive sign and likes to act quickly, and that might be how you'd like to be. And we've just looked at the heliocentric position, and heliocentrically there is a sextile between Mercury and Mars, and that Mercury-Mars sextile might encourage you to tell people what's on your mind. You might feel that that's expected of you. You might feel that that's appropriate. And yeah, you would be responding to the universal energy, but would you be responding correctly? Just because you feel something very strongly doesn't necessarily mean that you should tell everyone about it. Doesn't mean you should express your annoyance. And the other aspect we've got is Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars. Again, a Mercury-Mars contact. So Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars, there is this uneasiness, and you feel you want to resolve the tension. Something needs to make itself clear, and you're thinking. You've got ideas. You kind of feel that you know what's wrong, and you'd perhaps like to tell people what's wrong. But the question is, are you really going to be able to make an impact? I think it's quite possible that you're not going to be able to make an impact, at least in a very overt way. If you want to get things done, if you want to have an influence, it just may be important areas that you try to work behind the scenes. And also when I was talking about Mercury and Mars and the Mercury-Mars sesquiquadrate, I pointed out that Mercury and Mars were both aspecting the Saturn-Aries midpoint. And Saturn and Aries may make you feel incredibly frustrated at things that are going on in the world, and you might feel you should be doing something, but should you? Is it really the right thing to do? I suspect it's not. Just because you can't get things done, just because the world is up against you, is stuck, things aren't going your way, just doesn't mean you need to respond. I mean, you need to sort of step back and reflect. Kind of interesting that Antony Blinken, I don't know if Antony Blinken is watching this, he probably isn't, but Antony Blinken is, of course, the Secretary of State, and he's an Aries, the American Secretary of State. He's very invested in Project Ukraine, as they say, and he's very invested in it, and he's just seen Trump winning the election. And so you can perhaps think that with Mercury and Mars on the Saturn-Aries midpoint, he may be feeling very frustrated, and he may feel he needs to let off steam. He may want to do, Mercury-Mars may encourage him, perhaps because he's got the power to, because he's got the power, he might feel that he needs to do something, stir things up. Because if you're Secretary of State and he's in a situation where his power is about to go, January the 20th, he's no longer Secretary of State. Marco Rubio will take over from him, and so maybe he's influenced by it. And he's an Aries, and he might do something stupid or plan something stupid. So could be a bit dangerous. But really, Aries, I don't think there's anything you should be doing. However frustrating it feels, you can't take on the world on your own. And maybe, Aries, you need to accept that, at least temporarily, things have gone against you. I mean, I don't mean have gone against you in a sort of a personal level. It's just that some of your aspirations are not in keeping, maybe, with the way the world really is. Now, to end on a positive note, the moon is sextile Venus. And so with the moon sextile Venus, when you want to be, you can be very pleasant. Venus is in Capricorn. It's in a high-profile part of your chart, and so you actually can be charming in the way you use your words and your feelings. You should not be trying to cause strife and arguments, and you shouldn't be complaining. Instead, you should be trying to bring people together. Perhaps rally people, and I won't say rally people to your cause, because if you've got a cause, now is not the time to really be thinking about your cause, because your cause might actually be at odds with the way the world is. But if you just want to get people's attention, but in a sort of a gentle kind of way, Moon sextile Venus. And so I think Moon sextile Venus, close relationships can actually work quite well today. Just, don't have any, big ambitions. Make it all very sort of slow and relaxed, easygoing, and I think people will appreciate that. Taurus, the moon continues moving through Scorpio, which is your opposite sign, and the moon does make a sextile to Venus. So with moon sextile Venus, I think, Taurus, that this does make you a fairly pleasant person. I mean, I think you can come over as being a pleasant person, and I think that people should respond quite well to you. So it's perhaps a day for being nice and, not having big expectations, but I think if you make the effort with other people, if you make an effort to be pleasant, and you try to relate to them on a sort of a natural one-to-one level, things should be fine. And at the same time, new things may come to the surface. Just because a situation seems very ordinary, it doesn't mean it needs to stay ordinary. And it just may be that doing simple things creates a momentum that is quite unexpected, and suddenly something happens that in a way is quite elevating, and you may find meaning in the strangest of places. I mean, I suppose you could find meaning through contact with other people, and maybe people you know very well, people you don't expect to give you meaning, but somehow perhaps people can give you meaning. And so don't have any expectations, but all just be open to new possibilities. Things are possible, and whatever you're doing, things are possible. You don't necessarily need other people to find these possibilities. And fundamentally, Taurus, what you are kind of looking for, really, if you're honest with yourself, is freedom. You have been sort of aware that something has been holding you back, and it may have been just other people have been holding you back in the past, but yet now you are looking for some kind of liberation, and you don't want to be tied to things. And I think at the moment you actually can find a measure of freedom. If you look at things in a different way, Taurus, you'll start to realize how many possibilities there actually are. Many different things can happen, and it's also possible that there may be a situation that you have been in, maybe for some time, that's perhaps been weighing in on you somewhat, but now you're perhaps beginning to ease up, and you might even be feeling a certain sense of relief. You now perhaps realize that what you thought was a major problem, what you thought was holding you back, was something insoluble, is actually not as bad as it looked, and you're getting evidence that it is possible to perhaps escape a bad situation, or even transform it very much in your favor. So that's really something to be optimistic about. And as far as other people are concerned, I do think in general other people can be a plus for you. They do have a lot to offer, and I think you have a lot to offer them, though it may be that there is a sense, if you kind of ask enough questions, that a few people may just be concerned about the way everything is going, and yes, you can find your freedom today, but at the same time, you can perhaps start to be aware of how other people feel trapped. It's not about you feeling trapped. It's about other people feeling trapped, and perhaps you need to consider why they feel trapped. Maybe they just feel trapped by circumstances that are beyond their control, and maybe you can do something about them. Because if you can feel a sense of freedom, the possibility of liberation, the possibility that a problem can finally resolve itself, maybe you can share that optimism with other people, and perhaps in your own way you can help other people to free themselves from perhaps some long-standing obstacles. Gemini, it feels like you've got things to do, and this was an issue we had yesterday, and I think the issue continues. And these are things that you don't necessarily want to do, and it just may be that everything seems like a lot of work. I mean, rather tedious work. But perhaps you have to ask yourself, what actually is going on, and maybe, Gemini, you need to start to reduce things to their component parts. Consider what you want short term. Maybe think about what you want over the next month, and then ask yourself, well, what would actually need to happen for you to get what you wanted, to move from state A to state B? And I think that in the end, you would reach the conclusion that you actually have to start with basics. There's no point in doing the fun stuff, because you know that the fun stuff is not going to work unless the basics are sorted out. And so perhaps that's what needs to happen. And I think that you actually can be quite effective today at just sorting things out and making sure that everything that has been holding you back is addressed. And remember that your environment is a reflection of who you are. So if you want to know about the state of your own mind, it may not be necessary to consult a psychotherapist. Instead, you can just open your eyes and look around you. Because if you look around you, the way things are, I mean, in potentially quite a physical way, that's a reflection of you. And so, personal change is really difficult. But perhaps by changing your environment, Gemini, at some level, you can change yourself. I mean, that is the best approach. I mean, it's certainly not a good idea to get annoyed. I mean, that is certainly a temptation to get annoyed, because there are a couple of astrological significators of annoyed Geminis today. So, for example, tomorrow we have Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Mars, and so you can feel that aspect already. So Mercury is you in Sagittarius retrograde, feeling that you're not in full control. There are things happening you don't understand. You feel it's not all your fault, but still you get annoyed, and you're holding on to things, and you may be tempted to express your annoyance. And this is backed up by the fact that Mercury is sextile Mars heliocentrically. So we've got Mercury sextile Mars contact, and Mercury aspecting Mars in both geocentrically and heliocentrically. So that represents a Gemini who is somewhat stirred up. But I think that if you express your annoyance and you tell people what's on your mind, I just don't think it's going to be very appropriate. I don't think that that's that's going to work out. And, also, Gemini, you should remember that, there is a new moon coming up. And that new moon is on Sunday. So right now, it's the end of a lunar cycle. It's over. This lunar cycle that started at the beginning of November. November's been a long month. I don't know about you, but I think it's been a long month. It feels that a lot has happened this month. I suppose it's the election at the beginning of the month, but still, it just feels that it's a long month. And this long month is coming to an end. And, the moon will move into Sagittarius. We'll get the Sagittarius new moon. And that will change everything, I think. But just short term, it just may be that there's not a great deal you can do. You certainly shouldn't expect outside changes to have a favourable impact on you, because short term, the world is not going to change. And I fully get the fact, Gemini, that you're frustrated by the world. I mentioned that Mercury and Mars are both aspecting the Saturn Aries midpoint. Saturn Aries as a pair represents the world and how frustrating it is and how it can't be changed. It's that perception that it can't be changed. And so just realize that and just change what you can. And what you can change, what you can change is your immediate environment. Change your environment. Change the things that you are in control of. And perhaps you need to ask yourself, where is that control? Where does that control stop? And so change what you can, change what's in your own environment, change what you can control, and short term accept everything that is outside your control. And in that way, you'll feel a certain sense of balance. I'm not saying it's going to be a wonderfully happy day, but I do think it's a day when you can work on yourself and actually be quite constructive. Cancer, the moon continues moving through Scorpio, and as I say to you, when the moon is moving through Scorpio, it's a sign placement that a lot of other people are not very comfortable with, but I think you are perfectly comfortable with it. It feels right, and you're not fazed by, I suppose, the kind of emotional complications that are often associated with the sign Cancer, because it's all happening, very much on your territory, on your terms. And I think that, with the moon in Scorpio, your imagination is on good form. I think you are imaginative, and you generally understand what you see. And, if people are sort of behaving in a strange way, I think you'll take the whole thing in your stride. And, if there's any sense of confusion or people doing things that are not particularly seemly, I think you can take control of things quite easily. And that is because the moon in Scorpio is trine Saturn. So that moon trine Saturn, okay, it might be more at the beginning of the day, that moon trine Saturn, but I think you're going to feel it throughout the day. The moon trine Saturn is about you being in control of yourself, but also in control of other people, being able to, I think, exercise and influence. And I think in general, people will listen to you, and I think they'll also respect you. And we talk about other people, but do other people always matter? Well, they don't. And I think that if you have the time as Cancer, do concentrate on what you're good at. With moon in Scorpio, there are things you're good at. There are things you enjoy doing. I suppose Friday for many certainly in the US is a holiday. So if it's a holiday and you're not working or you don't have any obligations, that's great, because you can do something that is a natural channel for who you are, and you can just be reminded of what makes you different. And I mean different in a fortunate and creative sense. And the moon in Scorpio does make a sextile to Venus. Moon sextile Venus has a connection with relationships and how you're getting on with people. And so moon sextile Venus allows relationships to prosper. And I mean, it's kind of linked with the fact that its moon is trine Saturn. So what happens is that, the moon makes a trine to Saturn, and then it moves towards a sextile of Venus. So moon sextile Saturn moving to a moon sextile Venus means that, as far as I can see, that relationships can be stabilized, and perhaps you and the important people in your life can create a sense of harmony and just a general feeling that you're all going in the same direction. I mean, it's not dramatic, but it just feels comfortable. And then the last aspect of the day is moon opposition Uranus. Right at the end of the day, there might be a surprise. Something happens that you weren't entirely expecting, but I wouldn't be too worried about it. The moon is moving out of the Via Combusta. As I said, with the Via Combusta, moon between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio can be a time where things happen that are sort of disturbing and unexpected, but the moon is in late Scorpio, it's out of a Via Combusta. Yeah, it's making an opposition to Uranus, but yeah, something might happen that you hadn't fully planned for, that may be a little bit challenging, but somehow I think that you're not going to be fazed by it, and you may actually be able to see it as some kind of opportunity. Leo, I think it's another day when you will value your own company. You'll feel that that you don't really have to do anything. I mean, okay, there might be pressure to do something, but do you actually have to give in to this pressure? I don't think you have to. I think that it's a day when you can do things in your own way, at your own pace, and it happening at your own pace, that is particularly important. Because, if you try to do things too quickly, you're going to run over important details, and perhaps you might be tempted to give in to outside pressure, to rush things or leave things half finished, but that's not the right approach. And it's just a time when things have to be done properly, your way, and you don't have to impress anyone. And I think it may well be the case that your best work is going to be done on your own. Though don't forget your family and the people really close to you, and whatever's happening in your home environment. In your home environment, I think that you're going to feel very comfortable today, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to Saturn and it's making a sextile to Venus. So by and large, things should work to plan, and there'll be a sense of comfort. I mean, if you're in a job and you have to work on Friday, then if you can possibly work at home, so much the better. I think because at home you'll be able to do your best work, or at the very least you should be somewhere where you are comfortable and where you are in complete control. I don't think this is a time when Leos are into external surprises. There are different types of surprises. External surprises, things happening from outside, coming to you, that's not what you're going to be into. And so if you feel you have to have some high profile life, you have to be out there wildly socializing, I don't know, I think things could go wrong. I mean, things could go wrong in the sense of things happening that you can't necessarily deal with. But if you stick to what you know and trust, then I think you'll be fine. Now, as far as internal surprises, I'm surprised, the surprise of your own mind, the surprise of what you can come up with, the surprise of your own intuition. Well, that's a different matter. I think, Leo, it can be a time when things can just occur to you out of the blue. And, we still have that Sun trine Mars. The Sun, it was on sort of Wednesday that Sun trine Mars was exact, but it's still there. I mean, the Sun and Mars are only 2 degrees off that trine. So that does still give you a sense of who you are, a sense of focus and a sense of purpose. And also, I think it makes you quite inspired. And for other reasons, I think there may be moments where you just see things in a different way. See things in a way that is just a million miles from how you'd seen it before. And it suddenly just becomes obvious to you. It becomes very clear. It becomes clear in an instant. And the less you're disturbed, the fewer people around you, the clearer it's going to be. Because if you're in a high profile situation, your inspirations are going to be sort of watered down. And so that pure inspiration that you can have today, in the quietness of your own space, could be actually, Leo, very important and also very motivating. Do you want to share your inspirations? I think that in most cases it's probably not a good idea to share your inspirations. To tell people about your big ideas, to tell people how you see the world, how things occur to you, because they might not entirely appreciate it. They might not understand it, and perhaps it's something that you need to work on, over the next few days. And of course, we do have a run up to a new moon. Sunday's a new moon, and that new moon is in Sagittarius, and I will be talking in detail about that new moon. But I think from a Leo perspective, that new moon on Sunday, that represents the beginning of a new lunar cycle, and I think that things are going to be very different. And I do think that new moon on Sunday could mark could certainly for you mark a new stage when you're better able to express your fundamental creativity, and I think you're going to be sort of more positive and sort of more optimistic about everything that is possible. And so that new moon is something I'll be talking about. Well, I'll be talking about it in tomorrow's video when I'll be talking about what's going on over the weekend. Virgo, at the moment, you may feel somewhat frustrated, and the reason you might feel somewhat frustrated is because Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Mars. So, Mercury is your ruler. It's sesquiquadrate Mars, and so 135 degree aspect from Mars. That sesquiquadrate Mars is exact tomorrow, but I think you're feeling it. And with that Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars, there's a certain sense in which you just feel that things are not entirely going your way on quite a sort of grand scale. By that I mean you're asking yourself, are you in the right environment? Are you actually in the right almost historical time period? You'll be thinking, oh, well, if only this was 10 years ago, it would be just so much easier. And you're perhaps thinking, well, this is the world you're living in, and this is difficult, and it's problematic. And so with that Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars, there may be a certain sense of frustration, just a feeling that there is just nothing you can do. But what's actually happening, Virgo, is that you're just understanding the times you're living in. And I think it's just very important with this Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars not to take things personally. I mean, it's easy to take things personally, to almost feel that it's a slight on you, the fact that it is late, but it is late 2024, November 2024. I mean, that's the way it is. Time is passing. And you can't do anything about that. You cannot change the world. Even if you're Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's a Virgo. I suspect that, the British Prime Minister, even if you're Keir Starmer, you can't change the world. You can't even change your own country. You have the hand you've been dealt with. Maybe you're making that hand worse. I don't know. But that means that you have to be careful how you express your anger, and you have to ask yourself, what is the point? Because what is the point, and what do you seriously think you can achieve? And I think that you need to really focus on what you can change, and what you can change is the things right in front of you. And you can perhaps change things next to you. It's what is in front of you, what is adjacent to you, what is neighbouring you. That can perhaps be changed, but in a very subtle, low-profile kind of way. The moon is in Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio gives you an understanding of your immediate environment. It gives you the ability to talk to the people close to you, not just your family, but perhaps your neighbours as well, but be able to talk to them in a sort of a down-to-earth and sympathetic way. And you're not going to achieve huge amounts. You're certainly not going to change the world, but you can change what's in front of you. You can change what you see, but you can change it in a way that is very subtle. And the moon is making that sextile to Venus, and that sextile to Venus, you need to use the energy of that moon sextile Venus. It should be seen as a very calming energy. So whatever you do, you should try to make sure that it makes things calmer. It's all about understanding, but not understanding through shouting at someone or having an argument with them. You could have arguments because, as I've said, Mercury is sesquiquadrate Mars, and in fact heliocentrically we've got Mercury sextile Mars. So there's a lot of Mercury sextile Mars energy that you are going to be picking up on, and I think that is going to make you agitated. But you don't want to get so agitated that it starts to seep out and have an impact on other people, on your various relationships, and on your relationship with your neighbours, for example. You don't want it to go that far. And so, Virgo, I think it's just really important that you make a special effort to have a calming influence, and you just do accept your limitations, and accept the limitations of the times in which you are living, because in terms of the big things, you are not going to be able to change things. And don't forget, Mercury is moving retrograde. Mercury continues to move retrograde. Mercury will be retrograde for the next couple of weeks. So because Mercury is retrograde, that's going to perhaps limit what you can do. But I suppose the advantage of Mercury retrograde is it allows you to think about things again, and think about, if things aren't working entirely your way, perhaps ask yourself why, and you might come up with some answers. And Sunday we've got a new moon, and I think the new moon is going to give you a new perspective over the weekend. It's December the 1st is the new moon, and that might give you a new perspective, and that might give you not just new ideas, but it could actually be quite grounding for you, and help you to continue to get some perspective on what is going on. But I'll be talking about that new moon in my video for tomorrow when I talk about the weekend. Libra. Libra, it's not necessarily going to be a super active weekend. I don't think that other people are particularly going to be in the mood. And from your perspective, I mean, at some level, I think you'd like some excitement, you'd like some action, but are you actually going to be able to really see it through? I mean, you have to deal with the material in front of you, and just at the moment with the moon in Scorpio, things are a little bit slow, I would have said, and you know you can try your hardest, but you just might find that other people are not particularly responsive. I mean, they're responsive in a sort of a basic way, but if you're trying to get people to do things, I don't think you'll have much success. Though, you know, the moon is sextile Venus, and so that sextile between moon and Venus may be quite helpful, not in terms of getting people to do things, but actually maintaining and enhancing your relationship with them. You know, you can be actually quite a settling influence if you want to be. You know, and a lot of people are not feeling particularly settled. I mean, they might be trying their hardest to sort of keep a brave face on things, to be sort of calm and not being perturbed. But I think deep down, a lot of people are just not feeling very comfortable, and there may be a certain sense of powerlessness. I don't think that you yourself feel powerless, but I think everyone else or a lot of other people may be feeling powerless. And if people feel powerless, then there's a danger that, you know, they feel frustrated and they might want to vent their anger. And so if you have to deal with, you know, angry people, then, you know, try to understand why they might be angry. Perhaps you can provide a little bit of reassurance. Yeah, and as I said, with this moon sextile Venus, I think, Libra, that you can be a calming influence. Now, as far as you yourself are concerned, I think that if you strip away everyone else, and I think it's always, as a Libra, very difficult to strip away everyone else. You know, Librans, as a sign, tend to be very connected socially and very much understand those social connections. But if you can somehow strip away everything else and just look at things as an individual, and look at how you're seeing the world, you may actually find that in some ways you're actually quite optimistic. Yeah, other people might be frustrated, but are you frustrated? No, I don't think so. I think that you can see the possibilities, and you might get a sense that you're not as restricted as you thought you were. You know, you might have thought that there was no possibility of doing things, that there were things permanently holding you back. But when you actually look at it again, you start to see that actually you have a lot of freedom. And if there has been a particular issue that has been bothering you for some time, it may be the first time that you can actually start to see that actually there is a solution, that it's something that you are actually able to free yourself from. And so that's something that I think you can do. So, you know, be positive. And I mean, I'm very careful about telling people to be positive. I don't think people should necessarily be positive just for the sake of it. So I'm not just saying that, oh, be positive. I'm telling you to be positive because I think there is evidence astrologically that you can be positive, and that it can actually benefit you to have a positive view of the world, because it just is maybe the case that something you thought was an obstacle, something holding you back, something restricting you, you look at it again and you start to realize that no, it's not holding you back at all. And you may actually get some kind of a vision of your own freedom, and you may realize that you know what you thought was a real problem is not a problem at all, and that actually you can move away from it and find something else. And perhaps that's something that we can think about after the new moon, because over the weekend there is a new moon in Sagittarius, and that new moon is a new lunar cycle. And I think for you, that new moon could really emphasize this new sense of liberation, and that's something I'll be discussing in my video for the weekend. If there is a problem today, I don't think one should look for problems, but if there were to be a problem today, I would have said that it would be twofold, the problems today. The first problem is something I've kind of already alluded to. I think that certain other people may feel frustrated and powerless, and it's possible they may try to take it out on you, or they just might be on edge. But again, I don't think that's something that you really need to worry about too much. I think you will be able to diffuse the situation. Second thing, money. The moon continues to move through Scorpio, and from a Libran perspective, the sign Scorpio is often about money, and the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. Towards the end of the day, actually that might be into tomorrow, depending on your time zone, but with that moon opposition Uranus, there could be a certain realization about money, which you may not take kindly to. It may occur to you that more money than expected has been spent, or it may be that there's some bill or financial obligation that you're now becoming aware of. But at the same time, it is a day of freedom and relief, when you can actually see that a problem that seems difficult may actually not be a problem at all. So in fact, if something comes up, particularly as sort of a financial issue, your first instinct might be to be concerned about it, but then the second instinct is to see it in a different way, and you'll realize that what appears on the surface to be something to be concerned about is actually no concern at all, provided you respond in a timely and sensible way. Scorpio, we continue to have the moon moving through your sign, and I think that with the moon moving through Scorpio, you're feeling quite good about yourself, and you should be feeling good about yourself, provided you don't focus too far. You need to focus on yourself and your immediate concerns. If you look beyond the wall, if you look beyond your boundaries, then it might be a different picture. But if you just stick to what's in front of you, then you're fine. You're going to feel comfortable, and you'll be able to be quietly constructive, and I think that you'll have a sort of fairly sort of positive attitude, and this might be appreciated by others. So we've got the moon in Scorpio, it's sextile Venus, and so there is something about you that is pleasant, and you are sensitive, and you can pick up on people's feelings, you understand people's feelings, you understand people's likes and dislikes, and to an extent the way you communicate is calm and reassuring. However, we have a contradictory picture here. I can look at moon sextile Venus and I can say, well, this can be pleasant. It can be about you making other people feel comfortable. And that is if you are just focusing on what's in front of you. You take it, 1 minute at a time. You're not worrying about larger issues. However, if you start to think about broader issues, it might actually be a different picture, because then what happens is that a new set of aspects starts to make itself felt, because Mars is sesquiquadrate Mercury, and Mars and Mercury are both making aspects to the Saturn Aries midpoint. Now, I think that configuration relates to the wider world. And if you start to think about the state of the world, you start to think about politics, you start to think about all the things that might be bothering you, whether it's, the environment, economics, society. As soon as you start to go down that road, things change. You start getting angry, potentially. And what's happening on the outside, which short term maybe shouldn't be your concern, if you start to make it your concern, then, this can spoil everything. And, I don't think I'm entirely talking theoretically here. I mean, if you think about, what's been happening in society over the last year or two, people getting cancelled, and friends cancelling each other because they have different opinions, or they're not committed enough. Whether it's people supporting or not supporting Trump, or whether it's people's attitudes to issues like Gaza, that can break friendships, can break relationships. And so this may be what I'm talking about. Okay, not necessarily Trump or Gaza, it could be something else. But as soon as some wider concern starts to come into play, then that could cause chaos. And so, Scorpio, I suppose it's up to you, but I think the general advice would be today to keep it simple. Maybe don't read the newspapers, or, okay, a lot of people don't get their news from newspapers anymore, do they? Don't worry too much about the news flow. It's a Friday. I think in the US it's some kind of holiday, and so just perhaps accept that. Keep it simple, and that way I don't think there'll be too many problems. But if you feel it is important to look further afield, then just be aware about the hornet's nest you might be stirring up, because you might indeed be doing that, because it's going to agitate you, it's going to agitate other people, and your sense of equilibrium could be lost. And so I think for most Scorpios, just take advantage of what is good going on, and fundamentally that is Moon sextile Venus. It's a pleasant aspect. It's about getting on with people. It's not a particularly ambitious aspect, but it's just quite calming, and perhaps calm is what you need. Though I suppose one could also say that the Sun is trine Mars. I mean, the Sun was exactly trine Mars on Wednesday. That Sun trine between Sun and Mars is still working. It's still there, and so that's trine between the Sun and Mars could be quite motivating. It could allow you to really sort of push your ambitions if you have the opportunity. And it is and it remains quite a ambition, career orientated time for you. I don't know whether that's appropriate, depends what you're doing, but with that Sun trine Mars, so if you are trying to pursue a set of ambitions, then I think with that Sun, with the Sun trine Mars, I think that you can be successful, provided you remember that there is a new moon over the weekend, and so doing things just before the new moon can be problematic because you're working on a cycle that has is nearly over, and after the new moon, I think that things will be easier, because after the new moon, it will be the beginning of a new cycle. So you're thinking about new possibilities rather than trying to wrap up the old. So you might want to consider that. There's still, I do think the Sun-Mars trine for you can actually be quite motivating. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, I think it's another day when you're not entirely going to be yourself, at least in the Sagittarius sense of the word. You are not really at the moment a textbook Sagittarius. You feel that you need your own space, and you are very aware of your sort of inner Sagittarian sort of vibrancy, but are you really prepared to share it? I somehow think not. And I think that if you were to try to be a typical Sagittarius, it just might feel that you're not really getting anywhere, that you're not really hitting the mark. And so it might be a good idea to bide your time. And, over the weekend, on Sunday, there is a new moon in Sagittarius. The moon is about to go into Sagittarius very soon, but it's not there yet. At the moment, the moon is very much in Scorpio. And so with the moon in Scorpio, that does reflect how you want to express yourself. And in fact, you may not want to express yourself at all, not in any really meaningful way. So bide your time. And also just consider the possibility, Sagittarius, that you haven't understood things properly. I mean, maybe there's something you're trying to understand. You're trying to make sense of it, but it's not going very well. There's just a sense of just perhaps focusing on the wrong things, or just getting overwhelmed. And if you don't understand something, or if something isn't clear to you, don't beat yourself up about it. Don't feel that you have to come to a solution. You don't. In a few days' time, things will be different. But right now, it's just somewhat difficult to just express who you are in a clear way. And there might be also mixed messaging. And I'm not convinced that other people are always going to be very helpful. I mean, you just have to look at the condition of Mercury. So Mercury in the Sagittarian chart can have a link with other people, the people in your life. And Mercury is going retrograde. Okay, it might be in your sign. So with Mercury in Sagittarius, there are some people that really like you, want to get close to you. But Mercury is sesquiquadrate Mars. I mean, it's the Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars is exact tomorrow, but it's still there. And Mercury sesquiquadrate Mars may represent people who are angry about something. They're just agitated, and they might want to pass that agitation on to you. Now, they might do this by just having an argument, or by talking about things you don't want to talk about, or it may just be how they occur. It just might be the vibes they give off. You can feel other people's irritation. At least I hope you can. I mean, I know one shouldn't hope to feel someone's irritation, but it may be that if you don't feel someone's irritation, then there's an unconscious process at work. In other words, you are picking up on other people's irritation, and you think it's you annoyed, you are irritated about something, when in fact it's someone else. And so that would be a further reason why you should keep your distance, because if you get too close to people, you have to deal with all their baggage, all their material, and normally it's fine, but today I don't think it is fine. And so Sagittarius, I do think in most cases it's probably best to hold back and to concentrate on yourself, and to concentrate on your own contribution to your own success and happiness. And the sun is in Sagittarius, obviously, and it's making a trine to Mars. Now that sun trine Mars is past exact, but it's what, 2 degrees apart, something like that. But you can still benefit from that sun trine Mars, and that sun trine Mars, I think, is about you being active in your own world, in your own life, and not feeling you need anyone's help. It's perhaps about your own sense of adventure and being able to explore things and able to discover things, and doing it in a way that is completely independent. And it is the right thing to do. I mean, the sun is not just trine Mars, but remember, it's trine North Node. I mean, I've talked about this grand trine between the sun, Mars, and the North Node. Now, that grand trine is starting to break up. That's true, but so you need to take advantage of it while it's still there. And so that's something you need to do now, and perhaps over the weekend as well. We've got the new moon. I suppose that new moon will be kind of trine Mars on Sunday. There's a new moon, sort of trine Mars, sort of trine the North Node. So that new moon will give you perhaps a sort of a further impetus to really focus on who you are and what you can do. So I think that you have the resources you need, Sagittarius. I don't think you need anyone else's input. I may be wrong. I mean, there's always a situation where you need someone else's input, but I think today, I think independence, your independence does matter, and I think that it is something that really does need to be respected. And on a material note, talking about money, possessions, that kind of thing, there's a moon sextile Venus, and that does indicate that on your own you can do some useful work if need be, if it's necessary, and you can do things to boost your sense of boost your own sense of security, and making sure that you've got what you need. And it's possible, Sagittarius, that in your own way, at your own pace, you may make a financial decision. You may decide that something needs to be done financially that you maybe don't want to tell other people about, but you feel it's perhaps important. And it may be that through doing this, you could be saving yourself some money, but you don't perhaps want to tell other people because you're afraid of their response. And that would particularly apply if you're in a situation where someone else is looking for your money or claims to be dependent on you for money. It's just, you make a change to safeguard yourself. Maybe it's not about another person. It's maybe, I don't know, some kind of company you're paying money to, or whatever it is, that you might just quietly decide that an expense is unnecessary, and you just quietly decide to just end it and to perhaps save yourself some money. Capricorn, we have the moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio is not really a problem if you're a Capricorn, not usually. And the moon in Scorpio is trine Saturn. So moon trine Saturn is, I think, quite a constructive aspect. Now, that moon trine aspect is going to be stronger at the beginning of the day, stronger if you are in, say, Australia or New Zealand. But with the moon in Scorpio and Saturn in Pisces, I think that for all Capricorns, it is to an extent a stabilizing influence. It ensures that things aren't going to get out of control. And the moon in Scorpio, it also makes a sextile to Venus. Of course, Venus is in Capricorn. So I think that that makes you a stabilizing influence in general. I think that when you are around, things calm down, and there are people out there who are upset about things. They're perhaps complaining about how bad the world is, and as far as you're concerned, it's probably just nonsense. But when you're with people who are hyper, I think that you can have a calming impact. Of course, if you really are not having a calming impact, then probably you should just go. You don't have to be around people who are difficult, who refuse to listen to reason, who refuse to understand the advantages of having a Capricorn around, because you're certainly a good person to have around, or you should be a good person to have around. And it's not just that you're having a restraining impact. I think that also you're quite optimistic today. You believe that certain things really are possible, and it may require a bit of work, bit of effort, but as far as you're concerned, it can happen. And I suppose the reason for this is that, if we want to get astrological about it, is the fact that there is a T-square. It's a very wide T-square, but there is a T-square. And the T-square works like this, is that we have got a Sun-Jupiter opposition in the sky at the moment. It's a very wide opposition. With oppositions, I like to use an orb of, maybe 5 degrees. I don't want to use massive orbs, but the Sun and Jupiter are opposition each other, and Saturn is making a square to the Sun and a square to Jupiter, and it's making a square to the Sun with a 5-degree orb. It's making a square to Jupiter with a 5-degree orb. So what that means is that Saturn is not just on the T of this T square. It's on the Sun Jupiter midpoint. So if we try to work out what that T square means for you, I would have said that it means that the Sun Jupiter opposition on its own is perhaps about big ideas with little prospect of actually being realized. They're just ideas, over-optimism. It appears to go nowhere. And that might be other people's big ideas, or it might be your own big ideas that seem to be, they're very interesting, but they just don't seem very practical. But Saturn on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint changes everything. Saturn is realistic. It is questioning. On a negative sense, Saturn is saying, no, you can't do this. This is completely unrealistic. And that's something you can do. That may be a feature of you today. But on the other hand, Saturn can say, okay, you can't do this in this present form. However, if you are prepared to make some changes, if you're prepared to throw out some of your crazier ideas, but if you're prepared to be constructive and you're prepared to sort of work hard, then you can create something that really can happen. And so this may be something that you need to think about. It may be about other people's ideas. It might be your own ideas. So you can be constructively optimistic with this and turn something into reality. Now, I suppose if you're dealing with other people's ideas, you have to consider how are people going to respond. I mean, people should appreciate what you're doing. People should appreciate your practicality. Of course, we are living in times where some people are just totally unrealistic, and they don't want to take criticism. And even if it's from a sensible Capricorn, they don't want to take criticism. And I suppose in that case, what can you do? But Capricorn, maybe you should use this energy of the Saturn on the Sun Jupiter midpoint, and perhaps you should keep it to yourself, make it yours. And so, Capricorn, what have you been planning recently? And recently you might have been despondent. Maybe you're thinking, oh, these plans can't work, it can't happen. But have another look at it. Be constructive, be critical, but also be positive, and tell yourself that there is actually a way of making something happen, and only a Capricorn can do it. So it's all about using the planetary energies in such a way that ultimately you can benefit from them. Aquarius. I always kind of feel a bit bad, not always, but sometimes feel a bit bad talking to Aquarius, because it's supposed to be special. I mean, it's your sign. You are an Aquarius. You shouldn't have to share things, but sometimes you do have to share things, and the sharing comes from the fact that you and Capricorn have the same ruler. And you're right next to each other, and so your ruler is Saturn. Capricorn's ruler is also Saturn. So there are certain similarities between the two signs, and what you are going to have to share with Capricorn is this T square. I don't know whether you were listening to what I was saying to Capricorn, but what I was telling Capricorn is that there is a very wide T square at the moment, because we've got Sun opposition Jupiter, 10 degrees apart. Saturn is square Sun, Saturn is square Jupiter, Saturn is on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. So that is what Saturn is doing. And I take the view that this is really very positive if you handle it in the right way. I think that you, Capricorn, have the chance to take something which is perhaps a little bit crazy and actually make sense of it. And it perhaps relates to your inventiveness and your independent way of looking at things. You can make discoveries, and you can have big ideas. This is perhaps part of being an Aquarian, and you can then be in a situation where you might feel that you're really so close to making some kind of a breakthrough, but often the problem is that it's just not practical. And with this Saturn on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint, Saturn making with this, or rather at the same time being on the T of this Sun-Jupiter opposition, I think there is a challenge here. It is a challenge to take something that you have perhaps developed in your own way, something you are working on, something that is important to you, and make it real. That's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, Aquarians have good ideas, but there's no point in having an idea if you can't make it real, if you can't actually confront what is wrong with the idea and then confront it and say, well, actually, if you were to change this, then it could happen. And I think that it may be the case that one of the sticking points could be money. I mean, money does keep coming up, I suppose, from an Aquarian perspective, and it's simply because Saturn is in Pisces. And for many Aquarians, sort of on and off, I think this is a time when financial issues have to be confronted. And so if there's something you want to do, there always comes a point where there is a financial sticking point. And so maybe, Aquarius, you can actually start to look at the costings of something. There's something that's important to you, but also you're concerned about the expense, and maybe you can have another look at it all. Being inventive, but also being financially aware, and then you can perhaps start to see a solution. You thought it was hopeless, you thought there was no point, but if you're actually honest with yourself, there is a way through. There is a way to do what you want to do without breaking the bank, or indeed without necessarily spending any money at all. Maybe Aquarius, you've kind of focused just on the financial element of things. Maybe money is not the issue. It's perhaps something else. Money has to be seen as a resource. So how do you bring your resources together, Aquarius, to actually make something yours, and also to make something possible? And I think that overall today, I think that many things can be possible, not just the big things, but also the short-term things, the sort of the small things. And we do have a sextile between the Moon and Venus, and I think with that sextile between the Moon and Venus, I think that your ability to express yourself is quite good, and I think you have a good understanding of other people, and you know what their limitations are, and you can work with these limitations, and you do appreciate that other people are going at their own pace. They don't want to be pushed. They don't want to be hurried. You understand all this, but you understand also that things need to be done. And so I think it can be a day when you can get things done, but without upsetting other people and the people who are important to you. Pisces, there is some danger today that you do get a little bit confused. Maybe you just haven't understood all the facts, or you've misinterpreted something, misunderstood something, and as a result, you kind of get yourself into a situation where you don't really know where things are going. So Pisces, I think it is a day when you need to be aware of your own weaknesses. And perhaps one weakness is that perhaps you'll make assumptions which are perhaps based on absolutely nothing. And so it's important to have your eyes open and to be aware of what can be wrong, and perhaps be ready to get advice. I mean, people are prepared to give advice, but you have to get advice from the right people. I mean, it's always a problem, choosing the right people, but you have to choose people who have a certain sympathy with you and what you're trying to do, and perhaps have a sympathy with your concern. I think with your concerns, I think that can be found. I think that the Moon is sextile Venus. I think that if you are looking for advice and help, probably best to focus on people who don't know you very well. You know them a bit, you kind of trust them, but you don't know them super well. They don't know you super well. That's perhaps what matters. So that kind of person can be most useful. If you try to get advice, or you try to get close to people who you already know well, maybe they might be sort of partners, very close friends, and whatever, that could be somewhat troublesome. And I think the reason it could be troublesome is because certain people might end up just projecting their own concerns. People are concerned, and some people, they've got concerns about the way the world is going, the way everything is happening, and they perhaps have their own negativity, and they might want to impose their negativity upon you. And I don't think that is anything you really want. And I think that at the highest level, Pisces, I think that it's a day when what you should be really trying to do is to structure something. I think that there are some big ideas you have, big ideas that are troubling you as well. You kind of feel, Pisces, that there's something you should be doing, something you should be really throwing your energy into, and you have doubts about it. I mean, you know it's important, but you kind of think it might be impossible as well. And so you have these doubts, and maybe you should just confront the problem head on. Take something that is important to you. that maybe has been bothering you, if not for months, maybe for years. And it's very much about who you are and what you should be doing, what perhaps your destiny is. And take it and just be realistic. Try to be hyper realistic, and be hyper realistic in this case, maybe on your own. I mean, I've talked about getting advice, but on the really, really important things, the things that really, really matter, the critical things. I don't think today is a day for getting advice from anyone. Of course, I'm not talking about things where you need to consult professionals like health or legal stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that are sort of more on sort of an inspirational level, things that are connected with what you're supposed to be doing with your life. Those kind of issues, maybe only you can deal with them, and it may be you looking at them, looking at what's possible, looking at what is not possible, being realistic, but not doing yourself down, not being overly influenced by what is happening in the world, what's happening in society, not being influenced by all of that, but just confronting something and seeing, is it possible? Ask yourself that question, is it possible? And maybe you'll decide that it's not possible, but maybe you might also decide that there's a way through. There's a way actually to find what you're looking for, to actually make something happen. It might require a lot of work, but I think you might now be in a situation where you can actually start to see the possibilities. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 44, which is coming to meet. Now, this hexagram on its own is not particularly easy, and it represents a situation that we perhaps should be very wary of, at least to begin with. And it's, it says coming to meet, but the question is, what are we coming to meet? What are we approaching? And the general implication is that we're coming to meet something that should perhaps be avoided, but maybe something that is just too keen to get to know us. And there seems to be a certain threat to our independence here. So there's a danger that if we get too close to people, we might find that we've taken on too much, and these people might try to restrict our freedom. And we might find that increasingly there's just not so much we can do, perhaps because we're dealing with someone who on the surface seems quite sort of harmless, but when we actually get to know them and they start to make their influence felt, we find that they're just more trouble than they're worth. Now, we do have two moving lines, and the bottom line moves, and the bottom line is right at the beginning of the hexagram, and it's saying that the first thing we should do is stop. We mustn't go any further. We need to apply the brakes. That's what has to happen. And I mean, it's not such a bad line, because we have early warning of a situation that maybe doesn't look good, and we just need to stop before it progresses any further. And that might apply particularly to relationships, any kind of relationship. Someone who wants to meet us, knocks on our door and invites themselves to dinner, whatever. So there needs to be restraint, and we need to stop the situation almost before it starts. But we have a fifth line moving, and the fifth line in the I Ching tends to be fortunate. And the fifth line there's this image with the fifth line, and the fifth line has the image of a melon or perhaps a gourd that is covered Maybe it's covered by leaves, maybe it's covered by a tree, but it is covered and it is hidden. And so the question is, what does that mean? And so the Wilhelm translation of I Ching says, well, what that means is that we shouldn't just reject people just for the sake of it. It may be someone who seems to be an inferior element, someone who we thought was not going to do us any good. They may have hidden qualities, and perhaps we can somehow change them. So someone who seems hopeless can actually be transformed, and we can turn them into someone who actually can be useful. And that would be the image of the melon under leaves, which is under leaves. I think the Wilhelm translation talks about it being under vine leaves, no, willow leaves, I think. So that's one way of looking at it. But another way is to say, well, this represents something which is us. That melon, that gourd represents our own talents and our own excellence. We've got something really, really special to offer, and it's hidden under a tree. And with that fifth line, it's suggesting we need to keep it hidden under a tree. And I don't know, I think I'm kind of inclined towards that second interpretation rather than the first. So we've got something really special today. I mean, perhaps, but we don't want to share it. It's not because we're mean, but it's because the time is not right. And I think that kind of fits with what we know astrologically. You know, today is a Friday. We've got a new moon on Sunday. So it's the end of the lunar cycle. And because it's the end of a lunar cycle, now's not the time. If we're going to reveal something, if we're going to do something special, if we're going to show the world how wonderful we are, we don't want to do it right at the end of a lunar cycle. We want to wait until next week because you've got the new moon on Sunday. Wait for the moon to have a new moon. Let the moon get a bit bigger. Let's, because you've got the new moon, you can't see the moon. Let's see some moon. Unless, I don't know, it depends on the clouds, doesn't it? So think about what it is that we need to keep to ourselves. And perhaps we need to not just keep it to ourselves, but we need to grow it, to build it, to work on it. And I think that might also be reflective of the fact that Saturn is making this very wide, rather interesting T-square. So you've got the Sun opposition Jupiter. I know it's 10-degree orb, Sun opposition Jupiter, but Saturn is actually making squares a square to Sun, square to Jupiter, with a 5-degree orb for both squares. So that means you've got Sun exactly on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. And so Saturn is about working on something that could be really special, but having to work quite hard on it. And I know that T-square, I should have mentioned it in the introduction. I talked about it when I went into only Capricorn and Aquarius. So I should have perhaps made more of that T-square in the introduction. But that's something we need, I think, to keep to ourselves. Now, because we've got two moving lines, we move to a different hexagram, and what it moves to is hexagram 14, which is possession in great measure. Possession in great measure is, in many respects, one of the best hexagrams in the book. It's about possessing something, and it reinforces this idea that we have got something special, and it's ours. And I don't think it's necessarily about money. It's just about something we have that is really, really major. It's really important, and we can really use it. And I think perhaps at the end of the day, we start to recognize this. And this may be because it's a new moon. It's something, but because we're just before the new moon, it's something that needs to be developed to begin with in the darkness. Remembering in the previous hexagram, we talked about something being hidden by leaves, being hidden under a tree. We need to work on this, whatever it is, this special special ability or special talent, something that is completely unique to us, and so we need to work on that. And maybe after the new moon, we'll be able to sort of really start to bring it out into the open. So now I want to go back to the astrology, and I want to consider Neptune and Allan Lichtman. So just a few words about Neptune. I mean, I've been thinking so much about Neptune. Neptune has been a bit of an obsession for me over the last couple of days. And before looking at Allan Lichtman's chart, I think that with Neptune in Pisces, and I think it's particularly late Pisces, because if we use traditional astrology, I mean, let's just look at where Neptune is at the moment, just to remind us. So let's just have a look at today's chart. We'll put so Neptune at the moment is in late Pisces. Now, if you're into traditional astrology, and in astrology there are these different terms, different parts of the sky are ruled by different planets, and the last part of the sign is often tends to be ruled by malefics, in other words by Mars and Saturn. And so for example, in Neptune's case, when it from 19 degrees Pisces through to 28 Pisces, it was in the terms of Mars, and then in the last 2 degrees of Pisces, it was in the terms of Saturn. So the last part of the sign, using that logic, may be a little more malefic than the first part of the sign. With Neptune in Pisces, we shouldn't forget, there's Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, but the opposite sign is Virgo, and I'm thinking about this concept of perfection, which does seem to have be a theme. And so let's look at an example of this, which I talked about recently, with the Hamas's attack on Israel. Now, there is a certain nuance here. You have to be open-minded. You have to say, well, Hamas didn't attack Israel for no reason at all. I mean, there was a history there. It wasn't just something that came out of the blue. But at the same time, Hamas's behavior in attacking Israel was barbaric, outrageous, horrific. I don't think anyone should doubt that. Yet, some of the supporters of Gaza, those the people who really are demonstrating in favour of Gaza, are in many cases are in denial about that. They say, "But it didn't happen. There were no atrocities. It's all Hamas didn't behave badly. All these stories about mutilations and babies being killed and all of this, it's all nonsense. It's all fake news, whatever." And I think that this maybe links to the concept of perfection. So if you have a cause, it has to be perfect. You can't even see the nuances behind it. The Middle East situation is very complicated, and just because someone behaves in a barbaric way doesn't mean to say that there is perhaps some underlying reason. So logically, you should accept what happened on October the 7th, accept the barbarity of Hamas, but also you can be critical of Israel. There is a possibility of nuance here. But I think that with Neptune in Pisces, when people, because Neptune in Pisces is very much about religion, I think. And as I said in yesterday's video, it's about focusing, but it's about surrendering to something. And it's so much more likely now that people have forgotten about religion. People are not religious. They often don't believe in God, but they still need religion. We all need religion. It seems to be part of human nature. And so if you go for a religion, it has to be perfect. And so that basic mythology which creates this religion, there can be no nuance. There can only be the truth of the matter. It cannot be the case that Hamas, there's anything wrong with Hamas. You discount the fact that, I don't know, if you're gay in Gaza, you're likely to get thrown off buildings, and that has happened in the past. You completely whitewash it, and everything is perfect. And so that is Neptune in Pisces, but the opposition to Pisces is Virgo, and Virgo, part of Virgo is about perfection, and it can also, there can be a certain hypocrisy to Virgo, but it's about, you have to see perfection. You cannot see any blemishes there. And I think that we see this in other things going on with Neptune in Pisces. For example, the war in Ukraine. As I've said, there's no such thing. It's very rare for a war to take place when one side is entirely 100% right. Very rare. But when people look at the war in, for example, as I said before, I remember the Falklands War, when Argentina took over the Falklands. And I remember what people were thinking. I was very aware of this. And, I suppose, I was... At the time, I was a student at the London School of Economics. I was doing a degree in international relations, and I remember people were arguing about it all the time. People were looking at the Argentine viewpoint. The popular press, the Sun was talking about sort of gotcha when there was a paper that supported our boys, the Sun, and was very excited when the British sunk the Belgrano. But that was the popular press. In terms of my experience of it, being in a university, and I was doing a course in international law at the time, people had all sorts of views on it, and people were trying to understand the Argentine view. But you could argue that maybe Argentina did have a correct claim to the Falkland Islands or to the Malvinas. So there was this sort of easygoing view of, even when Britain was in a war, having been invaded, arguably, people were still having a sort of looking at things from different points of view. Now, with, for example, the Ukraine war, when Britain is effectively at war with Russia, when Russia didn't really invade Britain, but unlike in the Falklands, people are not. There's no argument possible. There's no looking at the Russians' point of view, looking at Ukraine's point of view, and so forth. Okay, in sort of alternative media, okay, it's now beginning to start to get to the mainstream, but at the peak of the war in Ukraine, people were only focused on one thing, Ukraine good, Russia bad. It was impossible that Ukraine were committing human rights violations. Even when the reports came in, when the Ukraine was took where was it? Part of Kursk, when they not Kursk, the other place, Kharkov, or Kharkiv, as the Ukrainians say, when they took over, the Russians took this area, then the Ukrainians took it back, and after they took it back, there were Ukrainian death squads killing people who had collaborated with the Russians, or people who had thought they had been collaborating. They were hunted down, and this was discounted. The possibility of Ukraine having its own human rights violations, Ukraine killing prisoners, false flag operations, and the fact that the whole war, there are different views on it, that Ukraine was not respecting the rights of ethnic Russians and so forth. All of that kind of stuff, which, if this had happened 40 years ago, people would be having this kind of argument in the early 80s. People would be looking at different views, but no. It had to be perfect. The cause had to be perfect. And I think that this is Neptune in Pisces with that opposition with Neptune in Virgo. And Virgo is about perfection. And your cause has to be perfect. You cannot consider any possibility that the opponent might have an argument. And again, that is the nature of religion. Ukraine has become the war in Ukraine, at least for the elites, the liberal elites, it has become an article of faith that Ukraine is in the right. It's just so weird. I mean, Ukraine is, the same people that were a generation ago were decrying all the atrocities, that in Chile, and the Pinochet regime in Chile, or even apartheid in South Africa, when in many respects the kind of atrocities that you saw in those countries, the Ukrainians to an extent are committing the same kind of atrocities. I mean, everyone's committing atrocities, but the point is it's ignored. We forget, to look at Gonzalo Lira. We talk about, people decrying journalists getting kidnapped. Gonzalo Lira, the independent journalist, was imprisoned by the Ukrainians, and he basically died of neglect. But basically, the Ukrainians killed him by neglect. And these kind of things were just swept under the carpet. But it has to be perfect, and that is the nature we're in. Neptune in Pisces, it all has to be perfect. And I think that we saw this in terms of the election. It seemed that with Kamala Harris, the Democrats find it very, very difficult to accept that it was her fault. That she played a big role in the Democrat loss, or at least the extent of the Democrat loss, because objectively, Kamala Harris was the worst mainstream candidate that has ever been fielded in an American election, certainly this century, in the 20th and 21st century. She was a really, really bad candidate. But if it became a sense of religion. I mean, you had to believe that Kamala Harris was perfect. I mean, I remember there was someone liberal commentator saying that her campaign was flawless. And clearly it wasn't flawless. It was terrible. But so I think that this is how Neptune in Pisces is actually working. Nuance is gone. It's all about seeing. It's all about perfection. You decide what your religion is. Is your religion supporting the Palestinians in Gaza? Is your religion supporting Ukraine? Is your religion doing everything to stop Satan himself, in the form of Donald Trump, from becoming president again? So that's the world in which we're living. And of course, there are other kinds of religion. Bitcoin. Bitcoin is perfect. It's not just whatever. That's what, if you listen to the advocates of Bitcoin and how they're describing Bitcoin, they see it as perfect. There are arguments against Bitcoin, but when you see them talking, it's nothing. It is perfect money. It is perfection, and that's what we see. Neptune in Pisces, with that sort of opposite reflex reaction, Neptune, the reflex reaction which moves into Virgo. Now, I do feel that this is relevant to Allan Lichtman. So Allan Lichtman was a commentator who predicted absolutely that Kamala Harris was going to win. And here is Allan Lichtman's natal chart. So thank you, Venus Kazemi, for reminding me of Lichtman's chart with relevance to Neptune with relevance to Neptune in Pisces. And I've talked about Allan Lichtman before, but so Allan Lichtman was actually quite a super Pisces, even though he has a sun in Aries. He has Venus, Mercury, Mars. He has 3 personal planets in Pisces. And so you could almost regard him as being a Pisces. Now, as far as where his moon is concerned, we don't know where his moon is, but his moon might be in Virgo, might be in Libra. So if you actually look at the way he described his model, so he was famous for making always being able to predict which way the election was going to work. Of course, from a statistical point of view, if you have 1,000 people that make a prediction about how an election is going to be made, let's say in 1980, say you try and predict the result of the 1980 election, and you'd have 1,000 people predicting the result of the 1980 election, let's say half get it wrong, so you've got 500 left, but then you move to the 1984 election, if it's a 50-50 chance, which of course in 1984 it wasn't, then you're going to get a smaller and smaller portion of people getting it right. But statistically, you're always going to get one person who's got it right all the time in the end. So just because someone gets it right all the time doesn't mean that they're particularly good. It may just be that statistically, there's always got to be someone. But he was absolutely adamant on this, and this is kind of ridiculous because it's a model, and every statistical model will occasionally be wrong. I mean, that is the nature of a model. You can statistically work out what the chances are, what the error rate is. You can do statistics on your model, although it is a small data set on which he's working on. And he had his 13 keys, and 13 keys, if those 13 keys apply, then you can predict that either one party or the other is going to win. So he supposedly applied these 13 keys and said that Kamala Harris was going to win. He was absolutely adamant about it. And so, he got it wrong. So what does someone who has got 3 planets in Pisces do when their model is wrong? Well, let's just have a look at his chart to begin with, just to get an idea about some of the main themes. So yes, he has the sun in Aries. So you could say that someone who has the sun in Aries is someone who is very clear, definite about what they believe in. And there is something very intuitive about the sun in Aries. I remember Nigel Farage, who's in Aries, said that there was a 90% chance that Trump was going to win. That was his intuition. He's quite an intuitive person, is, I think, Nigel Farage. But so here's Lichtman, sun in Aries. So it seems to be a strong sun, but then we have to look at the background. That sun may be in Aries, but it is opposition Neptune. So that Neptune can be a little bit undermining. There is a certain sense of delusion there. Perhaps focusing on the wrong things, that's possible. And then he's got Mercury, Venus, and Mars in Pisces. So that's so many personal planets in Pisces that, I have to say that maybe he's more of a Pisces than anything else. People ask me when I do my forecasts of the 12 signs, should I look at the ascendant or should I look at the sun? Well, you could say that if you got for him, what would I advise Lichtman to look at in terms if he was coming to my website and wanting to get a 12-sign forecast? Well, obviously, I'd say his ascendant, but I don't know what I don't know what his ascendant is. Let me just change that chart to make it clear. I don't know what the ascendant is. I don't know what time he's born, so don't know what his. So if we didn't know what his ascendant, if he didn't know what time he was born, if that was the case, then you could say, well, I do it for Aries. But then on the other hand, he's got 3 planets in Pisces. Maybe he should do it for Pisces. So, that with 3 planets in Pisces, that kind of tells us how he's perhaps really working it out. You've got a model, but 3 planets in Pisces, he's using his feelings. And don't underestimate one's feelings. One can use one's feelings to kind of get an idea about the mood of the country. You can certainly do that. But there is an elemental blank in his chart, but we don't know where the elemental blank is. If his moon is in Libra, then he's got no planets in earth signs. No personal planets in earth signs. He's got the node there. By the way, that's a part of fortune. The part of fortune is irrelevant because I don't know his time of birth. It shouldn't really be there. So if his moon is in Libra, he doesn't have any planets in Earth signs. So there could be a fundamental lack of grounding here, which is not helping. His forecasts are not grounded in reality, particularly when it counts. That's one possibility. Now, if his moon was in Virgo, then he'd have no planets in air signs. And so no planets in air signs would suggest, if you've got no planets in air signs, it says nothing about your intellect or your ability to be an academic, but there can be a certain inflexibility there, and sort of an intellectual inflexibility there. And if I had to guess, I would say that Allan Lichtman probably has his moon in Virgo. I'm guessing. I don't know. That would be my hunch. And I mean, I know he has Uranus in Gemini, but again, that's a transpersonal planet. That doesn't really count in North Node and Uranus. That doesn't really count. So as far as other things are concerned, he has Mercury in Pisces square Uranus. Now that Mercury in Pisces, it's not a great Mercury. Mercury is fallen, but it's in its detriment. I mean, it's fallen and in its detriment in Pisces, and it's square Uranus. So there's something about his perception and how he sees things which he doesn't fully get it, and maybe he's overly influenced, more influenced than he claims by the environment he's in, and perhaps the political environment he's in as well. And so Mercury square Uranus, you can see that he got really angry when he was, after the election. And he famously said, as Venus Kazemi pointed out, he used the words when I think Senk Yugar was criticizing him for being wrong. And remember, Neptune in Pisces, Allan Lichtman said that Yugar was guilty of blasphemy against me, to quote. He was accusing Senk Yugar of, I think, committing blasphemy. I mean, blasphemy against him as a person, which is an extraordinary thing to say. But again, we're in Neptune in Pisces. We're in the world of absolutes, of where the truth, we have our own truth. It's not a truth that it's in any way is necessarily any way real. And so turning to Lichtman and what was happening at the time of the presidential elections, I did look at this, and I did actually use this as a sort of subsidiary evidence for Trump winning, by the way. I was looking at Lichtman's chart. So Lichtman's chart and the presidential election chart. So, I mean, what I pointed out was at the time of the election, we had Lichtman has his Saturn at 1 degree 37 Leo, and so at the time of the election, Mars had just gone into Leo, so he had Mars conjunct Saturn, which is quite a difficult aspect to have. It can be quite frustrating, and that clearly was the case for him. But if we sort of zoom out from the chart and we just look at broadly what is going on. Here's this man who has made supposedly all these accurate predictions, but this election is happening at a time when Saturn is in Pisces and Neptune is also in Pisces. Now, I know that Saturn at the time of the election was not making a direct aspect to any of, was not directly aspecting his planets. I mean, not exactly, but broadly speaking, Saturn was in the same sign as his Venus, Mars, and Mercury. And so Saturn may have been undermining him in a general sense, perhaps encouraging him to make the wrong decisions. And of course, Neptune had been going through Pisces as well. So here is this Pisces, and we have to remember, I think he's a Democrat. And so he might regard himself as being an individual. If you're going to make predictions about elections, it applies to astrologers as well. You, as far as possible, should not be influenced by your own prejudice. But with Neptune in Pisces, particularly Neptune in late Pisces, moving through the terms of Mars and Saturn. I mean, at the time of the election, Neptune was, in the Egyptian terms, was moving through the terms of Mars. It's late, but yeah, as I said earlier, Neptune in the latter part of the sign, Neptune is not perhaps very fortunate, particularly unfortunate, because it's in the terms of malefics, and so Neptune is about the collective, and he's a Democrat, and so he's being influenced by the whole thing. He's become part of Neptune. Now, I said in an earlier video that it's more younger people who are kind of influenced by Neptune, because older people, they get set in their ways, and Neptune doesn't have such a big impact on them. And this man at 47, so he's nearly as old as Trump. He's 77. So this is a 77-year-old man, but perhaps because of his 3 planets in Pisces, he's just become part of the Neptune in Pisces collective. Harris winning was actually part of a religion. Unconsciously, he became a follower, and unconsciously, he couldn't conceive of any alternative. She had to win. And remember, the flip side of Pisces is Virgo. It's all about perfection. Perfection does matter. And Harris, she didn't lose because of the keys. It wasn't the model's fault. Again, he didn't blame the model. It wasn't the model's fault. He couldn't bring himself, I think, to see that the model was wrong. He couldn't see the fact that Harris lost because she was an absolutely unprecedentedly terrible candidate, which she was objectively. He couldn't see that. He just had to, because he'd become part of a religion, whether he liked it or not. And of course, his model became part of a religion, and so his model was perfect. But the reason she lost was simply because the American voters were racist and sexist, and that was why it was the voters' fault that she lost. So again, we see the reflex action of Neptune in Pisces there, Virgo. So you see, he's got 3 planets in Pisces. So when you get a big build-up in one sign, you often see the reflex action, and that sort of moves to Virgo. Now, we don't know whether he has the moon in Virgo or not. I suspect he might have it, and Virgo is about perfection, and he had to see the perfection of his own model. And so those are a few comments about Allan Lichtman's chart. I mean, it does illustrate again Neptune in Pisces at work, and how some people, particularly in terms of the American election, and Democrats were just overwhelmed by Neptune in Pisces, and they just couldn't see any alternative scenarios. And I think that it reminds us that in a time when we think religion is over, when Christianity is gone, religion is alive and well. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.